Hello and welcome to the very first official episode of the Tree of Geek. My name is Josh and I'm joined today with H-Train. How are you doing?
Fantastic.
Great. On today's episode, we are going to give you an official introduction to who we are and what we're doing and why we're doing this podcast. We plan on jumping deep into ourselves as well as geek IPs that we find most attractive, and we also plan on giving you a little bit of background information and tidbits about ourselves that people might not even know. But first, let's jump into the world of geek. Have you found anything recently worth talking about?
The only thing recent that I've seen is the final episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. That was fantastic. No spoilers. I'm not gonna tell you anything, but it was great. I loved it. Loved every second of it.
Unfortunately, I've only ever seen the original
The original series, TOS.
TOS. Okay,
TOS,
the original
yes.
series.
Yeah.
I do want to watch it, but I haven't gotten around to it just yet. My watch list is pretty extensive.
And the other thing would be the Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I just watched twice in the last week. Not a huge Spider-Man fan, but man, those last two movies were very, very good.
Completely spoiler free, but yes, the Across the Spider Verse that just came out, it is a visual masterpiece. The plot is absolutely fantastic, and it's a fun, pleasurable movie to just sit back and watch with your friends. All right, so let's get started with the About Us portion of this shindig. As always, we're going to roll a d20 to see which one of us is going to talk first. So, H Train, if you want, please go right ahead.
Did you bring a special dice, or are you going to borrow mine?
I'll be borrowing yours today.
Okay, well, I will go first. 16. 16.
16.
Here you go, buddy. Here you go.
All right, so I have a DC of 16 to beat. Let's see.
Survey says.
A 14. So please start us off.
All right, I guess I should get this train rolling. I'll try not to make too many of those jokes.
I see what you did there.
My name is Michael, and a good bit of people here and there have called me H-Train in the past. You might think to yourself, why would I be called H-Train? Well, when I was in the military, my last name was very troublesome to spell and to pronounce, and I had a couple battle buddies one time, and they kept trying to say it as they were talking to me, and one of them said, you know what, I'm sick of this. We're calling you H-Train, and that's just the way it's going to be. I didn't argue with them, and I just let it go, and it kind of stuck with me. Hasn't really been a huge thing lately in my life, but I figured we're doing a podcast, need a little bit of flair. Why not bring back the old nickname? I'm a Xenial, a child of the 90s and 80s. I remember the before time when the internet didn't really exist for us special people. I remember the old dial-ups. I was born in Michigan, but I've also planted flags in Arizona. I live here in central Pennsylvania. I'm a delivery driver, which I really enjoy because to me, central Pennsylvania, at certain times of the day when you're in the mountains and you're seeing the rivers and all the state parks, it's like another mini New Zealand in a way. I feel sometimes when I drive around here, I'm on like the Shire, and I love it, especially in the early mornings, around the time we're in now, around fall. I guess my geeky likes would be what I'm going to tell you next. I like Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, wrestling and horror movies, Pokemon, Dungeons and Dragons. I'd like to play more. Hopefully Josh can help me out with that soon. Comic books. I love the Chronicles of Narnia, Game of Thrones, and, you know, the list goes on. Anything that's sci-fi, fantasy, sword and sandal, you're throwing magic around, superhero type stuff, I'm kind of really into. But why we're here is to talk about our favorite IP, or favorite franchise, or favorite universe, right? That's what we're here for. You want to kind of know why we enjoy those things the most, kind of like at the top of the mountain over everything else. I guess I go first, and my favorite IP is Star Trek. I love Star Trek from the top to the bottom, to the left to the right. I enjoy all the movies. I enjoy all the TV shows. Now, I haven't really watched the animated show. A little bit before my time, and maybe one day I'll get to it, but you know, I heard it's good. When I think back to my relationship with Star Trek at the beginning, I try not to get emotional when I tell these stories because it reminds me a lot of my family. I remember being just a little nugget sitting on the floor of my grandfather who died when I was really young. And I mean, you don't have a lot of memories when you're around like 4 or 5 years old, but I remember seeing Star Trek on the TV. Of course, that just kind of, I don't know, brings a lot of emotions to me. So when I watch Star Trek today, it's a good connection to me remembering, you know, the people that I've, you know, lost so long ago. And when I was a younger kid past that, didn't have like the greatest home life. So at home, watching TV and kind of being, left alone a lot, kind of taking care of my sister, the one thing I had on that TV was the Next Generation. I had the crew of the Enterprise, Picard and Data and all them. They were like my babysitters. They were like my surrogate families. And I had a lot of issues with like loneliness and things like that I think a lot of people have. And Star Trek really helped me get past those things, helped me get past my awkwardness and realize that there's a lot of other people out there. When I started watching documentaries, about Trekkies or Trekkers or whatever you want to call it, I realized that I wasn't alone out there. There was a lot of other people just like me, or even had even harder lives or similar lives. And it's okay to be a little bit strange. And luckily, we live in a lifetime now, or an era of life now, where people don't really get on geeks or weirdos or nerds. When I was really young, like it wasn't fun to be a Star Trek fan. Like you got made fun of a lot. So it's I think we're in a great time now for sci-fi and fantasy and comic books. I mean, it's everywhere and it's kind of accepted. I moved around a lot. So I was kind of the new kid. Even though in school I had some issues finding friends, I knew that when I came home, luckily Star Trek was on syndication all the time. So I had that Star Trek to kind of anchor me. And it wasn't just about like me overcoming any emotional issues, but it also gave me a sense of wonderment, a sense of discovery. I wanted to learn about things. I wanted to travel the galaxy. I wanted to know what the stars were up above. I wanted to know how things work. Now, I didn't really pursue it a lot like I really wanted to when I was younger, but even today, it like makes me, when I write a sci-fi story, Star Trek's like the first thing that comes to mind. It's really baked and ingrained into me. So back when I was still young, I lived in Arizona with my grandmother. I was there for a couple months, and she decided we're going to go to Las Vegas. We're going to go to Las Vegas, and we're going to go do all types of things. Even though Michael, you're too young and you can't gamble. I don't gamble today. I think it's a waste of your time, but that's another podcast. So I went with my aunt Jan and my grandmother out to Arizona, and we go to the hotel room, and I'm looking around. Oh, menus here. I'm like, oh, what's this? And I pick up this pamphlet, and it's telling us the time and dates about the Star Trek experience, which is no longer around. And I hounded my grandmother, and my aunt, went and played mini golf. I'm like, please let me do this. Come on, let me do this. Let me do this. So finally, she breaks down. She takes me over there from the circus to however how long it got to wherever they were holding this, and it was, to this day, I'm going to say, like in my top 5 favorite experiences ever. To be able to walk onto the bridge of the Enterprise, to sit in a shuttlecraft. I'm so glad I got to experience it before they shut down. I couldn't go to the bar because I was too young. Like you can't even like go near where it was. Like there was a line and no, you couldn't cross it. But like the museum they had set up with all the Borg and the Klingon stuff, and it was just absolutely amazing. My grandmother took time out of her vacation, to let me do something that she realized was so important to me. And it reminds me that sometimes you have to sacrifice for other people when they want to do something. Star Trek gives you a lot of, I think, good ideals, a lot of good ethics to follow. Now, I'm not perfect, and I do make a heck of a lot of mistakes, but I try to remember what Captain Kirk would do or Picard would do in certain situations. But sometimes you got to wharf out a little bit, and you got to take people out a little bit. But those type of experiences just stay with me. It has given me so much love for so many other sci-fi franchises that have come along after it. Do you like Star Wars? Do you like Star Wars, Josh?
Ish.
Ish.
I mean, I've seen the main series movies, except for the most recent one. I never got around to watching it. I'll be completely honest. I broke the cardinal rule of being a geek, and I let reviews sway me. I saw how horrible the reviews were, and I just decided not to take the time to watch it. Eventually, I will, but I'm not really in a hurry.
I don't think they're going anywhere, so you have plenty of time to get to them. Well, now that I've given my emotional take on the Star Trek stuff and why I love it so much and what it does, I think, to help the world, I guess I would have to ask myself a few questions like, what is my favorite Star Trek movie? I guess that's something that some people would want to know. And I would say that although The Wrath of Khan is great, I'd have to go with First Contact. I love the score. Every time I hear the score, like towards the ending, like the main theme, like it just kind of punches me in the heart a little bit. Maybe it's because I get emotional because now I'll be when the Next Generation went off the air. I remember it vividly. It was the last episode. I cried and I cried. My mom and whoever was in the house made fun of me. I didn't care because like I felt like I lost a family. I felt like these are best friends I'm never going to see again. I'm so glad that Terry Metalis and so many other people have brought them back in the last year. It's fantastic. But as I was saying, my favorite movie is First Contact. I felt like Jonathan Frakes was a great director. The action was top notch. Captain Picard, when he flips out and what's her face says, "Oh, you broke your little ships," and he quotes Moby Dick. It just fantastic. I feel like it fires on all cylinders and then sprays a little NOS on there. And it just races past the other movies a little bit. I mean, The Wrath of Khan is great, and I give it love for being one of the best of the original movies, but I think so far no other movie has touched First Contact. If I was to say who my favorite character in Star Trek was, it'd be really, really hard to give an answer because there's so many great characters. One of my favorite captains is Picard. As a kid, my favorite character was Data. I mean, it's tapered off a little bit. I used to have a stuffed Spock, not stuffed animal, a stuffed Vulcan, I suppose. Got lost in one of my 100 moves. I really enjoy what Ethan Peck is doing with the character now. I like Captain Kirk, but I always thought Riker was a better fit for that type of character. A little bit more laid back, and I think he might have got more women than Kirk. I'm not exactly sure, but my new favorite show, which leads into this, Captain Pike being played by Anson Mount, I think is just setting the new series on fire, and I think it's really pointing it in a really good direction. Some of the other characters I liked, of course, were Dax, Garrick, DePaul, and I know Discovery doesn't get a lot of love, but Dr. Hugh Culber, I think, is a fantastic character. I wish they'd find some way to bring him into another series. Like, I know Discovery is about to go in its final season, but I wish somehow that character would still stick around. And also, the Enterprise. The Enterprise is a character itself, and they're all fantastic, but the Enterprise D would be my favorite. And if I have some time, I'd like to talk about something else that I really love after you tell us what your favorite IP franchise and domain of geek is.
All right. Well, thank you. Very enlightening. I honestly didn't know there was that many variations of Star Trek. I will. I promise. I will sit down and watch some
Maybe I'll
of
read a
them.
book to counter it like you keep trying to get me to do.
I'll watch Star Trek. You read a book. It feels like
Fair.
a slight time difference there, but okay. So as we said before, my name's Josh. I've gone by many nicknames over the years. I don't have any exciting stories. Like I wasn't in the armed forces to get my nickname. Instead, I had a Twitch, and that's the nickname that usually stuck with me was Twitch. As a kid, I screwed up my neck playing some football with friends, and well, it slowly evolved into a slight tick in like the I guess the neck, the eye, whatever. You honestly you wouldn't even notice it if you weren't looking for it. But using this nickname, I tried my hand at streaming video games on Twitch.tv. But as you can imagine, being Twitch on Twitch.tv, it didn't really work out so great. People got a little confused, like, oh, do you work here? It was just, it didn't work. So I needed a new screen name.
Well,
And
well, at least you kind of keep your Pokemon nickname Twitch in there. I understand now. I thought it was because of Twitch TV, but I'm glad you
oh, no.
explained. Never knew you had a Twitch, so
Yep. Yep.
all
Now
right,
you'll see it.
I'll look for it.
Now, yeah, now you'll look for it. So I kind of went on a little voyage quest looking for a new nickname with some friends, and I remember at the time I had a Discord channel for my Twitch channel, and I asked people like, "Hey, I don't know what do we change it to?" And my one friend Xander, who claims he's going to listen to this podcast,
Shout out Xander.
yeah, he jokingly said, "I guess you're having an identity crisis," and that's where my it's not really a nickname, but it's my screen name for every game I play, and every site that you have to register on is now identity crisis.
Question for you: the nickname Twitch. You explained how you got it. Now, obviously, you've used it for some other platforms and other places. So, is it a nickname that bothers you or does not bother you?
I'd say at first, when I first started getting called that, it was a little like, okay, yeah, real funny guys. But then it honestly it just grew on me. I mean that it kind of became like a my identity.
So, you wouldn't be offended if I was like, "Hey, Twitch, what's going on today?" Yada
Not in the
yada.
least
No.
bit.
Okay. Good to
I
know. Good to know.
honestly I still have friends that I run into now and then from my hanging out in town, driving cars days. That honest to God, I don't think they know my real name. Hey, Twitch, how's it going? I don't think they know my name.
Well, at least they do know or don't know your name, so they have an honest reason to call you something else. Unlike when I'm like talking to people and they say, "Hey, my name's Jimmy. What's yours?" I'm like, "My name's Michael." And they go, "Well, nice to meet you, Mike." So at least when they're like, "Hey, Twitch," they can't remember, but they don't
This is true.
look right in your face and go, "I'm not gonna call you by your name."
I will concede to that point. So eventually, I had kids. I discovered very quickly that kids are time consuming, and I gave up on being a streamer. I didn't have the time to dedicate to it. I didn't have multiple hours a day to sit in front of a video game when I had much more important responsibilities to do. I have grown up and lived in the same little semi hillbilly town in Pennsylvania my entire life,
Hey, we're getting a Starbucks soon, buddy, and a Jersey Mike's. We are moving up in the world.
and a Five Below.
Yay.
Yeah, first off, I don't drink Starbucks, but I am excited for Jersey Mike's because we had like 8 Subways and they all left.
They did. The Walmart one disappeared. I drink local coffee. Shout out East End Coffee Company. But everybody I've talked to, nobody is excited about Starbucks. Absolutely
No,
nobody.
no,
Yeah.
I don't blame them. I just think it's overpriced, and honestly, I'm not a huge coffee drinker to begin with, so I can't get excited about it. But yeah, so I lived in the same little town, middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, my entire life. Never really ventured out of the area unless I went on vacation or I've traveled a few times for work. I had been to Vegas. I went out to DEF CON before the big computer hacking convention with my brother. Some people would probably say that that's sounds like a sheltered life, but in all honesty, I mean, I don't mind. I don't mind the fact that I never really got out into the world and found myself or traveled. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd love to travel someday, but I'm also very happy with the life I built. Well, and honestly, I say honestly a lot, don't I?
Well, it's
Mhm.
good to say you're honest. Our friends were over the other night here, and I joked around with their kid because he kept saying, "Well, to be honest," or "I'm not going to lie." And one of my biggest issues is when people say that, I go, "Well, I'm appreciating that you're not lying to me right now. I'm really glad that for once you're telling me the truth." But sometimes it's just when you're learning to speak naturally. I mean, heck, I just stumbled across myself left and right giving my whole spiel because this is the first official episode, and you got to work into things, so you learn the little ticks or twitches that you have when talking.
So, to be honest, I couldn't see myself ever living somewhere that we didn't have mountains. Mountains and forests. I understand that the mountains we have here on the East Coast are tiny little hills compared to out west, but I mean, you got to make do with what you have, right?
Correct, but I think it's sea level too. I mean, we're like in the mountain. We're not like at the bottom of some of them.
Well, I will say we just did a trip to the beach, and when you get down to like the Delaware, Maryland, that region, it just gets flat. There's nothing there.
Yeah, I lived in Michigan for a while, and that's pretty flat too. In Arizona, very flat in a lot of places.
Well, that's one of my best friends lives in North Dakota, which again he says he'll listen to the podcast. So please listen to it, Jordan.
You should, because I was in the army in North Dakota for a minute.
There you go. He said it is so flat there, and it's always been my favorite expression that it's so flat that he can watch his dog run away for a week.
There's a place up there called Devil's Lake, North Dakota. So I was up there in the winter for electrician training. They have this frozen lake. I assume that's Devil's Lake out there, but they have a car just sitting on it, a jacked up old car, and they have a contest going who can guess like what day the ice is going to melt enough for the car to fall into the water.
Does it actually fall, or is it like sitting on a sandbar and it never goes under?
It looked like it was in the middle of the lake to me.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
that's pretty
I
neat
mean
actually.
there was a Walmart. That's all. I've lived in some small towns, but this place had like a restaurant, a Walmart, and a gas station. Like that was your entertainment. So
So you're probably trying to figure out by now. Okay, we now know your nickname. We you like the woods. You say honestly way too much. Why are you in any way qualified to be on a podcast about geek or nerd isms, culture, etc.? Well, that's a good question. Maybe I'm not, but I'm here anyways. I've always turned to the world of fantasy and sci-fi when the real world felt like it was just a little bit too much to deal with. I remember reading a quote once. I believe it was by George R. R. Martin, the writer of the Game of Thrones books, or Song of Ice and Fire, or maybe that is one of the
they're
books.
all the same.
Okay.
That's okay. Different
Um,
mediums.
It said, "A reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies, but the man who never reads lives only one." I feel that this relates to more than just books, though. This is movies, video games, comic books. Every medium of entertainment that you can indulge in allows you to put yourself into the shoes of a completely new character. It lets you live the life of someone else. All of these different mediums allow you to just, they let you live the life that you'd otherwise never get to experience, let alone even really know about. A great example: if you never discovered Star Trek, the odds of you ever daydreaming about, being on a spaceship and traveling and meeting these crazy creatures and giant cubes in space, it never would have happened.
Right.
For me, the big IP that I always loved, which, by the way, IP simply stands for intellectual property. Think of like how Sony owned Spider-Man for the longest time, and just recently, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Marvel is finally getting the rights back.
They're
Or
dating each other.
there's a
It's a game of give and take.
there's a weird game of rights that's going on there. But for me, the big thing was always the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the books and the movies and the Hobbit book only. That's a whole other story. We might get into that a little bit later. It depends how argumentative we feel. But The Hobbit was the first book I ever read because I wanted to read a book. I remember in high school, I had finished all my work early and I was sitting in my class bored. And the teacher at the time, I believe it was Mrs. Pollock, I believe that was the teacher's name, asked me if I wanted to read a book off of her little bookshelf. It's kind of like one of those 3 foot wide by like 2 shelf high bookcases that you never know what it's actually good for, except putting junk on it.
It's always good to have a bookshelf around. For those listening, you'll know what I mean.
Well, I figured, well, what the heck? I mean, this is before everybody had a cell phone in their pocket. I'm not gonna pull out my laptop or my tablet because heck,
Google, give me a synopsis.
we didn't have any of that fun jazz back then. So I went over and I figured I'd take a look at the books, and I remember thinking like, well, reading is stupid, but yeah, whatever. And I'm browsing the shelf, and I remember stopping on this one book just because I saw at the very, I think it was the top of the spine, was this tiny little, like, golden imprint drawing of a dragon. And I would later go on to find that that little dragon design is actually used in the book to represent Smog, which is, as I hope you all know, the dragon from The Hobbit.
Hey, spoilers, man, spoilers. Just kidding. Stop living under a rock.
I mean, the book's been out for
Or under a mountain.
80 years. So
It's been a few minutes.
I don't know when that came out, actually. I believe it was back in the 30s or 40s. So I remember I picked it up and I figured, yeah, what the heck? I guess I'll read this one. This was around 2002, like I said. So I would have been like a sophomore in high school. Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, had just released the year before, 2001, if I'm not mistaken.
Saw it opening weekend.
Did you really?
Sure in the hell did.
Oh, that'd be great. Looking back now, that'd be great. But at the time, I could have cared less. It was just some, wizard fantasy movie in the theaters. Who cared?
I took my best friend's brother, who was little at the time, to see it. And when we walked out, I said, "So, what did you like better? This Lord of the Rings or the Harry Potter movie?" I like the one with the swords.
When did the first Harry Potter come out?
I think it was a little bit before it.
Really? Wow, I didn't.
And if it did come out after, then I would ask him then. But either way, he said Lord of the Rings. Don't kill me in the comments because I don't have every single second of my timeline down. I apologize.
I just remember I didn't really care about the Lord of the Rings because back then I was still on the Matrix kick, which was, I remember, in 1999 because the whole Y2K bug and people relating it to the Matrix, and I was watching that on like repeat. So I didn't really care about the Hobbit. I didn't care about Lord of the Rings movie, but I ended up borrowing that book anyways because I figured, okay, I'll return it to her in a couple weeks or whatever and pretend like I read it. And I do remember one night I was in my room again, no phones. They're, very rare to have a TV in your room unless you had room for it because there were the big like tube box TVs. And I looked over and, well, there's my book bag sitting there in the corner, and all my friends were out busy. My dad was out in the kitchen or in the living room watching the news. Mom was cooking dinner, so I didn't really know what to do with myself. So I figured, all right, I pulled the book out and I opened it and I started reading, and I put it away.
How far do you think you got?
Maybe like half of the prologue. Maybe.
No, it's dense. Yeah,
It is.
eloquent but dense.
So I was never diagnosed, but I have been told by multiple people that I may or may not have ADD due to my severe inability to focus on any one thing for more than like a few minutes, unless it really, really captivates me. Now, I mean, I feel I've gotten significantly better over the years. At least I really hope so. But back then, like a movie or a comic book or music, these would hold my attention really well. One night, a couple nights later, I'm just laying in my room listening to Disturbed's new album, Believe. Yeah, I said new album back then, Believe. It was pretty much on repeat at all times in my bedroom. One of my favorite albums, even to this day.
That tracks.
And I'm not sure at what point I decided I was going to try reading this book again, but with music playing, I discovered that I could actually concentrate significantly better on what I was reading. And I know that this sounds horribly counterproductive, but I'm telling you for a fact that it worked. I was able to focus on and read this book, and I believe I finished the book in like 2 or 3 weeks, which I know some people out there are like, oh, I read 2 or 3 books a week. For me, 2 or 3 weeks or even a month is extremely good for reading. And I can say that I don't recall reading a book prior to this unless it was for like school or a class or a book report. And even then, I usually would go to the school library, get on. Do you remember Monkey Notes or Spark Notes?
I do not.
You could look up almost any book that was out there, and somebody typed up a quick a summary of like, oh, here's chapters 1 and 2, like a 3-page summary, all the main points that you need to pass a test or write a book report or pretend like you read a book. So for me, reading wasn't, it wasn't important. I could go look it up and I had better things to do with my time. But I ended up reading this book cover to cover while listening to Disturbed the entire time and loving every single minute of it. And to this day, I can tell you that anytime I hear a song from that album, I vaguely remember where in the book I was when that song was playing. Now, granted, it jumps around because an album is much shorter than a book. All right, so now I know what you're thinking. What the heck does this, little story have anything to do with me and how I'm, who I am today? Why is this so important? And why am I telling you about, reading a book when I'm supposed to be telling you about how this franchise or this property, changed my life? And that's because I can tell you, maybe even just reading this book saved my life. I very blatantly can tell you, and you can ask probably anybody I went to high school with, I was not a popular person. I back then thought I needed to be, so I would try to, get in with, fit in and all this, stuff that was completely unnecessary. I never got into drinking or drugs, and because that was a whole different crowd that I wanted nothing to do with. But I wanted to be liked. And I mean, I know most people, they can say, oh, I don't really care. I don't need friends. Well, you can say it all you want, but at some point in your life, you crave that connection. And at this point in my life, I was craving this connection. And after reading The Hobbit, I discovered that it was a gateway into an entirely new world. I was able to leave reality, leave all my stresses that come with it behind, and go be somewhere and someone else for a while. I'm not going to say I was bullied, but I was certainly made fun of. I was ignored, which I'm sure you can quickly relate that just being ignored by someone that you're trying to get the attention of can be just as bad as being bullied because you feel like you don't matter anymore. Without them saying it, you feel it, and it sucks.
I completely agree with you. Being the new kid, being picked on because you're the new kid, being the last kid to get picked because you're the new kid, it's never fun. And the only big issue
Hmm.
I have with this town is that when I started high school here, well, it wasn't high school, it was middle school. It was very hard to fit in here. When it was separated between the two schools. Very, very hard to fit in. There was a lot of kids that had their own 3 kids, 4 kids together. And if you weren't part of that and you were a new person, you weren't getting in. It was a very tough school to be in while I was here.
Outside of school, I hung out with a few close friends. We rode bike, we skateboarded, we hung out around my neighborhood. I mean, it sounds like paradise to me now, but back then, that's all I had, and I wanted more. I wanted more friends. Now I would give anything to just go back and be with those friends again. because I see it. They were true friends in my life. But thanks to all these factors, I fell into this huge state of depression. And honestly, that's hung on to me since. That depression and anxiety, I've gone through my share of, hard times. I've lost people. And I've discovered reading these fantasy and sci fi books, they allowed me to enjoy a completely different story for just a little bit of time. And these books were better for me because instead of just mindlessly watching TV where my mind could wander and I could, start daydreaming about stuff that shouldn't matter, I was actively engaged in reading. I was visualizing myself in this whole new world. It forged my imagination into an active part of my being that I feel has followed me through to today. It allows me to see these fantastic worlds in great detail when I'm reading or listening to audiobooks or even reading comic books. Sometimes I think that is absolutely not how that person should look because in my own head, I get my own picture of it. Later, I'd go on to read the full Lord of the Rings trilogy multiple times. It is to this day my absolute favorite trilogy. I watched The Fellowship of the Ring many times before even going to see The Two Towers in theaters. Eventually, I'd go see The Return of the King with my one friend Alicia. Again, we are just friends, but we both shared this incredible passion for the Lord of the Rings franchise. And I remember, if you've seen the movies and if you haven't, again, that they came out what,
First movie was 2001. So yeah,
one, three, and six, I think, or five, something like that.
yeah. Like I said, stop living under a mountain.
I remember we walked out of that theater in dead silence. We walked out, it was nighttime. Neither of us said a word. We got in our vehicles and we drove away. And I talked to her later and she agreed. Like, we were just struck in the heart and we needed time to process it. That the way that movie ended, not only was it the end of an amazing adventure, but it was kind of like the end of our adventure because the movies were over now. Like, what do we do? Well, The Hobbit came out eventually. I've seen the first one, and that was more than enough for me. There's so many issues I have with that movie. That might be a whole episode in its own.
It'd be a great episode because I think we disagree, but that's okay.
But now I read constantly. Fiction, nonfiction, a little bit of historical. I'm slowly getting into it. It's drier, but it's depending on the topic, it can be pretty dang interesting. It's become a huge part of who I am, and I firmly believe that without the initial exposure to The Hobbit when I was, what would that be, 16 years old, I never would have found my love for reading, which means I never would have discovered the incredible world of fantasy, fiction, sci-fi.
Basically, if it is set in a world that is
That's
not
not ours.
ours and it has a sense of adventure to it,
Yeah,
a sense of challenges to overcome, or things are just beyond belief, from the earliest mythological tales, way back in the day with the Norse and the Greek, all the way till now and beyond. It's all
yeah.
out there. It's all under the umbrella of geek. Every one of these branches reaches out to one of those realms.
Anything that can take me out of this world, and it's not even a matter of, oh, I need to escape my depression now, which, again, if you're struggling with it, it was a fantastic way to cope. But it turned into more of simply, hey, I get to go live this other life that I never knew about. Like right now, I'm playing through Baldur's Gate and I get to be whatever I want. I've been a DM for what I say, like 7 years, because D&D is the same way. You can do whatever you want. You can be whoever you want. It's, what's the word, cathartic?
It takes away all of the negative feelings you might have inside. And I feel you on that. I watched Prince of Thieves on VHS. And say what you want about the movie, the accents, I don't care. I watched Christian Slater and Kevin Costner on repeat, and I used to go out into the woods of Michigan, and I was part of that merry band.
Hey, I'm
And
not
I
I'm
was
not throwing
swinging
any
from a
hate.
rope on a tree. I was living in tree houses. That was another thing that really got me out there. Conan and Prince of Thieves, all those type of
Hey,
things, man.
side note, the one guy I talk about, that I work with that encouraged us to do this, he demanded we do a Conan the Barbarian episode on the comics, the show, etc. He's a huge Conan fan.
I have a friend that might be able to help us out with that
Good,
as
because
well.
I only know Arnold Schwarzenegger was Conan.
There's only one Conan, and he crushes your enemies. He sees them driven before you, and hears the lamentations of the women. Now hurry up, girly man. Go!
So that's my story. That is why I am into this entire culture. I mean, I know a lot of people refer to it as geekdom or geek culture or geek
Weirdo, nerd,
whatever, but it really has become its own culture. Like you said, these things are actually socially acceptable now, and
$1 billion machine.
oh yeah.
Billions.
Well, and if anybody ever questions that, turn around and say the MCU built 100% off of Marvel Comics, the man Stan Lee, and other people.
Shout out Kirby.
They literally took someone's imagination, put it on paper, and eventually it became a live action billion or more dollar industry of just movies.
Hey, you like the new stuff that's out, or you don't like it? Look at George Lucas, Star Wars. I'm telling you, hey, the House of Mouse owns everything now. You know, it does.
Yeah. I mean, that's like, look at Spielberg. He had, like, what, a couple years there where he just was hit after hit after hit because he started capitalizing on people like the unexplained fantasy. They like things that aren't going to happen in daily life.
E.T. wrapped me up as a kid.
E.T., Jurassic Park, Jaws. Of course, that could happen. I don't trust boats.
It happened in New
Don't.
York recently. So,
Yeah. I mean, he did Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
right.
These were massive hit movies, and it's because people want to be able to just step out of their world, step out of their comfort zone, and go be entertained.
You want to throw off your work boots from the construction site. You want to get sick and tired of hearing your significant other nagging at you. You want to get away from the kids. Maybe your punk brother's an idiot. Doesn't matter. You want to go to the theater and you want to be taken out of that seat to some place you can't go. You want to live the lives of all these amazing characters.
Absolutely. And what about you, the listeners? We more than encourage you, get a hold of us. Let us know, like, what IP or what franchise changed your life. Oh wait, you might be asking, how can you do that? We are now officially live on our website, treeofgeek.com. There's a contact us form. Jump over there. Feel free to drop us a line, and we'll try and reply.
We won't try. We will. We do want to hear it. We want to hear what your guys is. Say you've listened to 1,000 Geek podcasts out there and you're like, oh, these guys are just like the other ones. They talk about the same things. Why don't they ever talk about A, B, or C? Well, tell us. What is A, B, C, D? Whatever it is, man, let us know. And if it's something we're versed in or we have any knowledge on or something we're like, hey, we've never heard that before, let's dive on in. We might discuss it. We might have an episode on it. So, yeah, let us know.
If it's something we're not well versed in, I can almost guarantee that between the two of us and our network of friends, we know somebody that we can bring on to talk with us.
Yes.
Or if you find yourself to be a self proclaimed expert, please let us know and maybe we'll talk.
That sounds like a fantastic idea.
That could be fun.
I know I talked about Star Trek and how it's my favorite IP, but I feel like I have to throw love towards another major geek influence in my life, and that influence is, of course, comic books. I've been hooked on superheroes since the early 90s when I was just a little nugget. And of course, I knew who Superman was. I knew who Batman was. I mean, everybody did. But I was kind of more into like He-Man and Silverhawks, Thundercats, the Ninja Turtles. And I remember one time my grandmother took me, or my grandfather rather, took me to a pawn shop. And he said, well, Michael, you can get any two things in his really angry voice. And, I think that was his way of love. I don't know. But so I, perused around a little bit and I found two items. I found two books. One was a Hulk versus Thing comic book that was really large and I can't find where it is on the internet. And the other was one of the Marvel handbooks, the official handbook of the universe. In fact, it was volume 2, number 3 from 1986. That was from Cloak to Dr. Octopus. The Hulk and Thing comic was all right. It was cool. I think I'd seen the Hulk on TV before, but I really didn't know who the Fantastic Four were, so it didn't really get me. But what did get my imagination was that handbook because I've liked to look in encyclopedias. I like to read about new things. Obviously now we don't really do encyclopedias, but Wikipedia, whether you think half of it's real or not, is a very good source. Or go to superpowerwiki.com or any of these other sites that all you amazing geeks out there have put together. But back then, we're talking like 1992, 91 when I got this stuff. I mean, we didn't have any of those, so they
My
had to put
wife
out
was
these.
born in '92.
My sister was born 92 as well. Yeah. It wasn't long till the X-Men animated series came on TV, and that fueled my passion. I used to take the little high C boxes they had at the time. They had little bios on the back, and my friends and I at school in the cafeteria would cut them out. We would trade them like they were cards. We didn't have any store around to go buy comic book cards. They did have a few out at that time, but I had zero access to them, so that's what we did. Like, oh man, you got the Professor X? I don't know. I got Cyclops though, and we'd trade them back and forth. And that's what introduced me to Wolverine. That short little guy that took no crap from anybody. He was Canadian. I was from Michigan. I mean, match made in heaven, right? And the TV show really, really put him like on this massive pedestal for him. So I tried to.
The X-Men animated series.
Yes, the X-Men animated series, which they're bringing more out hopefully soon.
I just heard that the other day.
Let's get these strikes taken care of, guys. Let's get going.
They better bring the classic, like that little theme song back.
Yes. Did you know that was like stolen from some European record? I saw this last year. I don't have the info in front of me, but they on YouTube you can find a video where they play like the original record from like the I don't know, like the 50s or 60s, and then they play the X-Men theme song, and it is it's there. It's taken for
like
sure.
They didn't like take the tone like Ice Ice Baby and
Ding,
what's
ding.
the other
See,
one?
that's the
Under
difference.
Pressure.
Yeah.
Like they actually took here's the song, let's cut and paste it.
Yeah, like if you listen to the record, it is.
Wow.
Yeah, it is the X-Men. I don't know how that all copyrighted stuff worked out, but so yeah, I watched the cartoon, and soon I was like, you know what? I want to create my own characters. I always wanted to own my own comic book company. I wanted to draw first, but then over the few years, I realized, well, that's really not where I'm going to go. Especially when I sent a letter and a picture to Marvel Comics as a kid and said, "Hey, maybe you could use my character. Maybe I could write for you someday." And they gave me an extremely polite letter back saying no, in so many words. But it was fantastic. I still got it in my safe.
I was gonna say it's just cool that they replied.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about it now, I mean, would Disney reply to you or?
Well,
or
I mean,
some
I've
other...
applied to jobs where they don't get back to you.
Right. Communication is key. That's what I said this morning at work. But that's not what we're here for. Soon I fell like just in love with everything that had to do with comics. If I could get my hands on it, I would. And I loved that back then Wizard Magazine would show all the different comic book companies. I loved when I lived in Michigan. I'd pick up pop cans because it wasn't soda, it was pop. Pick up pop cans. I would take them. I get my 10 cents. I get my money. I go buy some comic book cards, or I'd buy, which was my very first comic was Wolverine that had Deadpool in it. Wolverine had bone claws, and I think it was like number 88, something like that. So it was my first comic I bought with my own money. But I get so excited because every month that Wizard magazine was coming. We didn't have internet. You didn't have all these cool TV shows or reports to tell you about things. So that's what you had, and it just fueled my desire to write and write. And hopefully, this podcast will reignite that fire so I can write more. So Star Trek, I love, and I love comics. On my bookshelf, I have the Star Trek Encyclopedia. I have the On Board the USS Enterprise book, but I also love Lord of the Rings, and I love The Hobbit. I like the movies. I do have those books. I have not read them. But one, just real quick here, the fantasy book I did read a lot as a kid, I would go from school to school, and I'd always have to do a book report. And they say, go to the library and get a book. So the smart guy kind of figured it out. I kept reading the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe over and over and over. And I would just keep doing the same book report. And my mom, of course, had the cartoon Hobbit on very, very often as I grew up. So, in fact, at some point I got sick of it. And I was like, I'm not sure if I even want to watch these movies.
Yeah, at home right now I have stacks of comic books. Actually, my wife complains all the time because there's this massive tote, like storage tote, the 2 foot high and sitting in the closet, and I got like littler ones and boxes sitting around it. That you need to do something with these. I'm like, well, they can't go in the basement because they might get damp. They can't go in the attic because they might get too hot. Yeah, they're good right here.
Yeah, you got to keep them safe. I got all my stacks over there in my cabinet. I got them in their plastic containers, all the good ones there.
I do want to get like the actual comic book like boxes, the long skinny ones, to properly store them.
I don't buy too many comics anymore though.
I
don't.
still do. I like to buy I'll find on eBay, somebody selling like 50 comics for 25 bucks. The one guy I found, he was selling all of them guaranteed from was like 1960 to 80, random, no doubles.
I would be interested in something like that. It's just some of the newer things. I feel like some of these DC Marvel have, especially DC's rebooted their thing so many
Mm.
times. When you don't read anything for a very long time, and then you come back like a year or two later, and you're like,
You don't know where to pick up.
yeah, they
Yeah.
move so quickly.
Yep.
So I try to keep up with like Moon Knight. I'm reading here and there, but it's kind of. I just picked up a Squadron Supreme. Fantastic.
All right. Well, I think we're nearing our time. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode. I really do encourage you, write in, let us know what IP, what franchise really spoke out to you, as a kid or even currently. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to, get some feedback, make this a more engaging and less of us talking to you and more of us having a conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We greatly, greatly appreciate you taking your time, whether you're on your drive or you're sitting with your feet up on your couch. Thank you for taking your time to listen to us ramble on about the things that we love and hopefully you love as well.
Give us a follow, leave reviews, on whatever platform you're listening on. Share the podcast to anybody you think would be interested or even not interested. If they open it and get listening, who knows? Maybe they'll like us. Hit up our website, www.treeofgeek.com, to contact us, to listen to the latest episode. Stay tuned for updates. Maybe one day we'll be doing a tour. Probably not, but you never know.
A magical
You
mystery
never
tour.
know. And if you want us to do any specific content, hit us up. Let us know what you guys are thinking. If you really like the content we're doing and you want to hear more, you want to make sure that we're around for more than a month or a year, you can become a subscriber. Go through our website, treeofgeek.com. Help us grow tab on the far right. You can do a small monthly donation. I think it's like $3 to $10. Help us out, and we'll be more than happy to sit in this little basement and pump out content.
Absolutely. Everything he said, crank it up to 11.
All right. Well, thank you for exploring this branch on the Tree of Geek. Remember, you can find us on all major podcast platforms: Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, and of course, treeofgeek.com.
Do we want to give a hint maybe to what we're doing on the next one?
Sure. In 2 weeks, we'll be back with a sticky situation.
Hope you're not afraid of spiders. See you later, guys.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.